The stories you watch, read and play dictate the way you see yourself and the life you lead. Cool. But the vast majority of the stories we're fed are based on one particular skewed, destructive and divisive trope that doesn't serve any of us. This means that if we want to change our lives or the world we live in for the better and for the fairer, then we need to start telling different stories. I'd like to propose one way to do this. By the way, my name's Hazel Gale. I'm a former therapist turned author and creator of the fantasy mental health game Betwixt, which is where you'll find all of my best and most creative tools for self-awareness building. And this video is part of a series devoted to the, in my opinion, fascinating world of character arcs. These are the 6 archetypal journeys that map onto the archetypal human life story, as laid out by K.M. Weiland in her brilliant book, Writing Archetypal Character Arcs. The maiden and the hero, who take their quests during the youngest stage of adolescence and early adulthood, followed by the king and queen, who represent midlife, and the crone and mage, who handle the themes of old age. As you may have noticed, these archetypes are very much gendered. This is because they represent the feminine and masculine aspects of the psyche, which, of course, we all have regardless of our biological sex, chromosomal sex or gender. Which means that we all have an inner maiden and an inner hero, no matter how we identify. And when these archetypes show up in stories, they can be embodied by characters of any gender too. For example, Neo's story in The Matrix is an example of a maiden arc. And Dorothy's quest in The Wizard of Oz is an example of a hero's journey. So let's get a sense of how these gendered archetypes fit into the archetypal life story. The first key thing to understand is that these 6 archetypes are sequential. They're not things that we can pick at random, because each is reliant on the success of the previous journey. In other words, you only get to embark on your hero's journey if you have successfully integrated the learnings from your maiden's journey. Another super interesting thing to recognize here is that these archetypal journeys are not about becoming the archetype in question, but arcing out of it and into another. This is because life, as long as it involves growth and change, as we would surely want it to, can be seen as a continual cycle of psychological death and rebirth. Ideally, we all inhabit one persona only for as long as it is healthy and effective. At some point, every version of self will necessarily be laid to rest in order to make way for the birth of the next evolved version of self. Therefore, the maiden's journey is not about being the maiden. It's about arcing out of maiden and into hero. Likewise, the hero's journey is not about becoming the hero. It's about arcing out of hero and into queen. And it's by looking at this side of things that we can see a fatal flaw in how our culture has very often misrepresented its beloved hero's journey. In this particular arc, after slaying the dragon and rescuing the damsel in distress, the hero returns to the village to reintegrate as a mature adult. His quest was one of initiation, and in order to pass this test, the dragon slaying is actually less important than the reason for doing it, which is love, and how it's done, which is with personal responsibility and invariably some sort of ego sacrifice. The hero's journey is about learning to sacrifice the selfish, power-hungry desires of the ego in the name of love. But that last bit tends to get missed out, or at least squished into a tiny little happy ending kiss in the movies. And this actually deprives our poor hero of the growth that's meant to happen in this part of the story, meaning that the version we get fed over and over again is actually freezing the hero in hero. And as a result, the world, or at least the Western world, is by proxy also getting stuck in this hypermasculine, conflict-focused and fear-facing archetype. Not good. If we could only let the hero level up to queen and reintegrate with the community more fully and more often, then the healthy cycle would be able to resume. And culturally, surely we would be more balanced when it comes to acceptance of different genders, valuing each other, and all of that other good stuff, theoretically at least. But this isn't only important at the cultural level. If we come back to our individual journey through these archetypes, the protagonists, that is our transition from role to role, would mean that we would shift seamlessly between feminine and feminine again repeatedly. A little like the tide going out before coming in, or the cycle of breathing, a protagonist or human following this path should be able to oscillate equally in a psychological sense between the two ends of the gender continuum. In other words, as Jungian theory teaches, and as the oldest myths also suggest, the aim when it comes to personal wholeness and integration is to achieve a state of psychological androgyny. Not masculine or feminine exclusively, but able to accept, express and access all of it. I find this idea really exciting, and it's part of the reason I'm proposing new gender-neutral archetypes for each of these 6 stories. These renamed archetypes still represent traditionally feminine or masculine traits, but they do so without limiting the representation of those traits to female or male characters. For me, this is important because I don't think it matters how often you explain that the terms masculine and feminine are not equal to male and female. The implications are going to do their implicating regardless. And within this sequence of archetypes, the masculine characters have more power, more status, and do all the ruling. So I don't think that's helpful. And on top of that, there's another problem, and that's that it's harder to relate to characters of a different gender to our own. And this means that at best, each of us will probably struggle to connect with at least 3 of the traditional 6 archetypes. And if you're non-binary, well, then none of it's going to be easy. But it's all important. So please meet my new DeGendered Archetypes. They do lose some of their symbolic potency because the more recognisable an archetype, the more powerful it will be, and the most recognisable ones are all gendered. But that's a hit I'm prepared to take, and anyway, the stories are all the same. Let's finish then with a slightly more detailed overview of each arc that I gave in the last video, including the archetypal antagonists, that is, the baddies faced by each of these characters. As you listen, see which resonates most strongly for you, because you may currently be taking any one of these journeys, or even a number of them, in large or small ways in your life. And if so, you need to know which. Formerly the Maiden, the Tenderfoot's journey is all about flying the nest, braving the big bad real world, and facing the archetypal antagonists of the predator and authority. Psychologically, we'll take this journey anytime we find certain situation feeling too small for us, perhaps a job, a relationship, or of course our childhood family setup, and need to make the uncomfortable decision to step out and away as individuals. Instead of hero, we have the warrior, which is an archetype already used in Jungian theory anyway. The warrior picks up where the Tenderfoot left off and finishes the individuation phase by discovering and reckoning with their own great personal power. They do this while battling the antagonistic forces of the evil dragon and the sick king. We'll touch on the learnings of this journey any time we have to balance our need for personal victory with the need for love and connection, which is often. Instead of the queen, we have the luminary. The first of the midlife arcs, the luminary's adventures begin in response to a call to leadership, and they bring the protagonist up against the antagonistic forces of the invaders and the empty throne. We'll take this journey anytime we recognise a void or flaw in an existing authority or ordering structure, and often reluctantly realise that it is we who must step up and take on the role of leader. Alternatively, we'll face the luminary's challenges anytime we need to learn to work with others, or to manage people, or anything like that. In the place of the king, we have the sovereign. This arc is about accepting the natural cycles of life, knowing when it's time to step down, and therefore reckoning with self-sacrifice. The antagonists here are the doubting rebels and the great otherworldly cataclysm. We'll touch on the learnings of this journey whenever we find ourselves in a situation where we can either act in our own interests or in the interests of the greater good, but not both. The crone becomes the seer. This is my favourite of all the journeys. The seer takes a pilgrimage to the underworld to face death itself. That's antagonist number 1. The second is the dangerous tempter, who tries to distract the seer with the one thing that could lure them off their healthy and powerful path that they're on. As this journey is all about metaphorical death and rebirth, we will come into contact with the seer any time we make some kind of difficult personal transition or change. And finally, the mage is still the mage, because I don't think that term or its associations are that strongly gendered. The mage's journey is one of mentorship, and therefore the relinquishing of ego in order to have lived a good life. At this level, the antagonists are very abstract. The mage needs to face down evil itself and human weakness. We'll touch on the themes of this journey whenever we're confronted with the challenge of letting go of anything we have become attached to. So, based on that information, what's your guess as to which journey you might be living through or struggling with at the moment? You could be slap bang in the middle of one of those arcs right now. Or you could be tackling all of them in different ways in different places. But it's unlikely that you're not dealing with any of those challenges. So were you most drawn to one archetype antagonist combo? Or did a few of them ring bells for you from different contexts of your life? Please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video, when we start exploring these journeys in much more detail, which I can't wait for. In the meantime, as always, I really hope this helps. And if you'd like to take an epic adventure through a magical world in the name of personal growth, then you can download the narrative self-exploration game Betwixt, which you can find on the iOS App Store and Google Play.